My name is Andrew Daphne, and I'm the Instruction and Outreach Librarian at the New Jersey State Library. And it is my pleasure to present today Patricia Donahue, who's going to be talking about the history of her house, including a former slave that lived there. So welcome, Patricia.
Thank you.
Um, she holds a BS degree from Columbia and an MS degree from Rutgers, both in the sciences. After 15 years in government and corporate positions in environmental protection, Pat became a public school science teacher. Recently retired after 22 years in the classroom, Pat earned her Master Gardener certificate and now has time to research the history of her new and old home. And as a side note, Pat disliked history until its adventure. So welcome, Pat. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Before we jump in, we'll just go over some housekeeping items before we get started. We will be taking questions at the end of the program today, but please feel free to submit them at any time using the questions box in the GoToWebinar dashboard, or you can email me directly, and my email address is on the screen there. There is a survey that will be available at the end of this webinar, as well as in a follow-up email. If you could please complete that, we always greatly appreciate your feedback, and it really helps us as we move forward with our programming. While there's no website dedicated to the individual in the house that Pat will talk about today, there are two books that you may be interested in terms of slavery and African-American experience in New Jersey. One is called The Ragged Road to Abolition, and the other one is If These Stones Could Talk. So please take a look at them if you are looking for more information, looking for some good reads, and hopefully you'll be able to get a lot out of them. Before we jump in, the last thing I have for you is just a tutorial of the GoToWebinar dashboard for those of you who might not be familiar. If you are on a laptop or desktop, this is what your screen or dashboard should look like. If you're using a Apple mobile device or an Android mobile device, your screens are going to look different depending on the device you're using, but all of the features will be there. At any time, if you have any problems, can't figure anything out, you can use this raise hand button here. That'll alert me that you're running into something. I will send you a message directly, and hopefully we'll be able to work that out. There are no handouts for today, but this session is being recorded and will be shared with everybody once it's available on our YouTube channel. And as I mentioned before, the questions box is here. You can type in your questions, hit send, that'll get sent to us, and we'd be happy to answer them at the end of the program. So that is everything that I have for you, so I will turn it over to Pat.
Thank you. All right. Okay, are we seeing what we need to be seeing before I get started?
Yep, looks good.
We're good? Okay. So thank you everyone for coming. As I was already introduced, I just want to emphasize that my background did not include history. I am a science person, and it is thanks to the purchase of the home that we now live in that I've gotten involved as an amateur, very amateur historian. This is, whoop, how come that did not click? I have to advance it from here. Okay. So this is the house in question, and I call my presentation Finding Benjamin James. I'll just start at the beginning. In the beginning, let me get you located. In 1731, Windsor, New Jersey was part of Middlesex County. In 97, it was divided into East and West. And in 1838, it was placed in Mercer County. So right now, the house is where the star is in the map on the right, in the easternmost corner of Mercer County. Benjamin James was in the area highlighted in red on the map above. If we zoom in to that particular area, you'll see there's a big D on the map. This was called the Mount Tract. It was owned by Richard Mount. It's about 308 acres. And in somewhere between 1771 and 1774, he built the first house on that property. He then sold it in 1795 to his son-in-law, Samuel Ely, whose name is going to become rather important as we go through the presentation. So this is the house when we purchased it in October of 2013. And when we moved in, we were given a host of very important, historically significant objects. Some were framed photographs and maps that are on the walls. We received additional black and white photographs. And quite frankly, a new homeowner working full-time, etc. I didn't do much with the information until later and until I retired. But here are some photographs to give you an idea. So the Pullen family lived in the home in the late 1800s. The home at that point was considered a federal style construction. And I draw your attention to the locust trees that were planted by the Pullens in about 1860. This is the same house in 1902. Notice the size and shape of the porch. And look how much larger those trees have gotten. The house and the property belonged to the Estes family for a very long time. This is what we consider the modern ownership, and the house is often referred to by locals as the Estes house. The Estes owners were getting rather elderly, and they wanted a ranch-style home built on the property. And they offered the house to the town of East Windsor for historic preservation. The town commissioned someone to do an extensive background history on the home. And the final determination was it was too expensive to restore the home and keep it as a historic, open to the public space. The borough attorney at the time did not want to see the house left to rot or to be torn down. So he and his wife purchased it. Michael and Frances paid $4,000 for the house with the understanding that they would pick up and move it. The house was moved in 1981, and it only had to go a quarter of a mile just around the corner. Here you see the house on a truck. It is being held up by 12 steel I-beams. And if anyone's been watching, it's come up on a couple of news channels. There's an enormous Victorian home in San Francisco that was moved yesterday, and I've seen some video clips of it. It's really impressive. I unfortunately just have this one static photograph. Now, there was a problem with moving the house, and that was a little bridge over the Rocky Brook. So Michael Panay, the borough attorney, had to get the DOT, Department of Transportation, to replace the bridge. So the bridge had to hold a 250-ton solid brick house. So the bridge was put in, and the guardrails had to be taken down, as had all of the electric and phone lines. So there was a team in front of the house taking all the lines down, and a team behind the house putting everything back together. And the house, well, there's the commemorative marker for the building of this one little bridge. And if you look closely down on the left at that telephone pole, that's the left-hand turn that the house had to make to be put down on its new foundation. So here's the house after it's been plopped down. And you'll notice that the front porch is gone. Notice the size and shape of the front door. So this is what it looked like when it was moved. Apparently, there's some interesting stories of what happened when the house was moved. The foundation wasn't exactly level, and the plaster started to crack, and there were all kinds of problems. But if you were to turn around and go back that quarter mile, the spot where the house was is now empty. And I took this picture at the end of the year. This is what's left of those locust trees that were planted in 1860. There's a couple in the back are still alive, but the ones closer to the road are long gone. And you can see how large they were before they finally passed away. So here's the home, and it is officially called the Mount Ely Handcock House, and it is in East Windsor, which is now in Mercer County. The Mount part of the house dates to 1771. The Ely part dates to 1800, and the Hancock part is from about 1860. So the house is named after the three main builders of the structure. Unfortunately, the Mount part of the house no longer exists. The materials from it were incorporated into the Ely part of the house. You'll also notice off to the left, if you look in the back behind the lamppost, that is the addition that was put on in 1980 when the house was moved. So again, we received some important information when we got the house, and one was the extensive historical study that was done of the property for the town when they were trying to decide if they were going to preserve the house or not. This document was given to us when we purchased the home. So here is the label on the front, and in Appendix C, which is on page 14, there is a genealogy of Samuel Ely. He bought the house from Richard Mount, who had originally purchased the property. That was his father-in-law. And on this page, there's a reference to a Negro boy called Ben. And I looked at that and did not know what to think. And I decided that I was going to find him. Hopefully this works. So I started speaking to my local historical society and a title expert whom I knew. And I was told that historical research depends really on three things. Was it written down? Did anybody bother to write it down? If it was written down, did whatever it was written down on actually survive? And if it did survive, does anyone know where it is? I thought about that and I said, I think there's a fourth item. That is anyone looking for it? And I found myself being that person who was looking for it, whatever it was. And at first I was very lucky in my search. At the State Archives in Trenton, I found the will from Ely, Richard Ely, who left the property to his son Samuel. So this is the original book. You'll see that they've wrapped it in plastic. I couldn't believe they let me hold it. And when you open the book to the last will and testament of Richard Ely, dated August 18th, 1791, you find a variety of items. On the right in this picture, you can see an itemization of his property and its value. You also notice how the pages fold out. It's actually a rather long will. It continues both before and after this particular page. And if you look at the beginning of the will, it says, I, Richard Ely, being weak and infirm in body, but of sound mind and judgment. And he proceeds to itemize what he wants in his will. Richard Ely was dying of dysentery. Dysentery is either a bacterial or amoebic gastrointestinal disease that at that time could not be treated. Not only did he die, but his wife died. 2 of his children died, and his mother-in-law all died from dysentery in 1791. And then I found the line that I was looking for. I will and bequeath unto my son Samuel the buck horse and the colt he now has, the Negro boy called Ben. And there he was. In my research, I've learned that some slaves would be made free in wills. Often those wills were contested or overturned. And less than 1.2% of slaves could actually become free by virtue of their owner dying. Mostly wills and last testaments were used to continue slavery of that person and even that person's family. Now, I was very surprised, and I have to say, really disappointed, disheartened to discover that there were several other African Americans who were mentioned in this will. And the Negro wench, I mean, she wasn't even given a name. Jemima also died from dysentery, and I do not know what became of this slave. There were 3 other male slaves, and they went each to a different son, John, Joseph, and Aaron. You'll notice that I've put Aaron's name in red to draw your attention to it because he has an important part to play in the local history. So it's now 1791. Sam Ely is 20 years old, and he now owns a 10-year-old black child. By 1794, he had married Anne Mount, and in 1800, they built the addition to the original home. So Ben was with Sam when this part of my home was built. So before I continue with what I discovered about Sam, I think it's important to say something about slavery in New Jersey. Many people, particularly older ones of my generation and older, learned in school that this was a Southern problem. And it actually was a very real New Jersey problem. So slavery started in New Jersey in the early 1600s. In fact, it was encouraged. The original grantors, Berkeley and Carteret, and those names should sound familiar because there are towns named after both of them, would give land and additional land to settlers for every single slave that they would bring to the colony. Now, this was meant to start agricultural production, but it also served to make slavery a foundation upon which the state's economy was based. So I took a look as far back as I could get to learn about slavery in New Jersey. And the first document that I was able to find was from 1772, which shows who was in Windsor. Now, at this point, it was not East and West, it was just Windsor. And you'll see that there is a population of slaves, and that there are 95 of them, 44 of which are women. And it is possible that one of these women was Ben's mother. Now, East Windsor held about 1/4 of the town's population. It's hard to imagine, but at that time, there may only have been a total of 300 homes in the county. I'd have to go back and check that figure, but it was very sparsely populated, huge tracts of what were often called plantations, which is another word I didn't expect to hear. We typically associate that with slavery in the South, but the same term was used here. So by 1700, settlers had been receiving many, many acres of land for the slaves that they would bring in and work their farms. New Jersey had been divided into an east and a west, and it was settled differently. The western part of the state was mostly settled by Quakers who became very active in the abolitionist movement. They did not approve of slaveholding. Now, not all of them, but most of them. And in fact, they had managed to free all of their slaves by 1790. On the other hand, East Jersey continued with slavery right up until 1865. So New Jersey had a gradual Emancipation Act in 1804. And the point of this was to set a time frame within which slavery would end. That is how it was sold. However, it also allowed for owners to sell or bequeath their slaves, to trade the time that their slaves owed them to others. It also allowed them to abandon slave children and then get paid for supporting them through either the overseers of the poor or by having them live with other families. In 1807, the Treasury was nearly bankrupt because many folks in the state signed up. It was really too good to be true. You could get paid to not have a slave, whom you had because they were still there working. And it had to be repealed in 1811. So in 1804, Ben was in his early 20s. And he was here with Sam in this house. And I found an interesting statistic that 54% of slaves died before their 25th birthday. So in 1804, Ben was about to beat those statistics. Another stop I made was to the Rutgers University Archives in New Brunswick. And I also learned a new vocabulary word, and that word is manumission. I can't believe I got to my age without knowing the word manumission, but it is how a slave was freed. And in 1800, only 1,755 slaves had actually been freed. This is the only book that survives, as far as I have been able to determine, from Middlesex County that holds the manumissions. So I went to Rutgers, and they had found the book for me, and I introduced myself and I said, I'm here to see this book. And the young lady behind the counter went and got it, and she just handed it to me. And I was flabbergasted. I could not believe that she was letting me touch this. This book is well over 200 years old. They did ask that I put it on these styrofoam blocks to help protect the binding. And I have on the right a picture of the page for slaves whose names started with B. And unbeknownst to me, the very first line says Benjamin James. And this is how I found Ben's last name. Up until this point, he was just Ben. The book is fragile, but the paper is very thick. And as I said, it was awe-inspiring to actually hold it. So let's zoom in on the manumission for Benjamin James. So on the right is a photograph of the actual paper signed by Samuel Ely. And on the left is my best translation. Note to any teachers out there or parents, children need to know how to read script because all of these old documents are written in script. So anyone going into history, that might be something that you need to think about. Otherwise, and even still, I certainly grew up reading and writing in script, and even still, it was quite challenging, and I had to ask for help. So what does this document say? It says that Benjamin James was a slave of Samuel Ely, and that on the 17th of April in 1807, Sam brought Ben before the overseer of the poor so that he could be examined. Slaves to be freed had to be healthy so that they would not become paupers or require welfare. They had to be healthy, the assumption being that they would then be able to take care of themselves. The document was signed by the justices of the peace and recorded, and Benjamin James was now free. So I want to go back for a minute to the original book that my husband and I were given, one of the historical artifacts when we purchased this home. And the author of this extensive history is a fellow by the name of Clark Hutchinson, who has since passed away. They were a very prominent family in this area. And in 1802, Joseph Hutchinson freed a slave by the name of Samson Peters. The manumission paper was signed by Joshua Ely. Now, Joshua Ely is the brother of Samuel Ely, who freed Benjamin. Peters went on to be a very famous Black minister in this area. He founded the Free African Society of Trenton. He formed the Mount Zion African Methodist Episcopal Church, the AME Church, the first Black church in Trenton. And in 1822, he helped form the Mount Pisgah AME Church in Princeton, which was Princeton's first Black church. Now, this is the kind of information that tends to survive, the information that puts manumission and the end of slavery in a very positive light. And here's another one. I asked you earlier to remember that I had highlighted the name Aaron Ely in red, and here is why. It's a very famous local story. There was a woman by the name of Patience Track, and she was born in 1787 on a southern plantation. She escaped slavery and was heading to Canada, but she was captured at Aaron Ely's farm. Now, Aaron Ely's farmhouse no longer exists. It would have been a few miles from where I am now. But according to local historians, his farmhouse was a refuge along the Underground Railroad. Now, the bounty hunters quickly found Patience, so Aaron paid her ransom and set her free. Patience was so grateful for this that she decided to stay with the Ely family. Now, I don't know, I suppose she could have continued on to Canada. And apparently, Aaron provided for her in his will, telling his sons and grandsons that they would have to take care of her. She died in 1879 at the age of 92, and she was the only and the first Black American to be granted the right to get buried in a white cemetery. And she is buried in East Windsor Cemetery. That is a photograph from a book. And I had to use the photograph from a book to show it to you because when I went out to look at the tombstone, it has really been eroded. It would really be nice to see that this particular tombstone could be salvaged somehow so that it doesn't continue to deteriorate. And then last night, while I was preparing for today, I discovered something, I guess, disturbing. And looking back through some of the documents I have collected, I found that Aaron had also freed someone named Daniel James. And if you go back to the original will, Aaron inherited a Negro boy named Dan. So he was freed in 1808. It wasn't until I saw this document that I realized this might be Ben's brother. It would be his big brother because this Dan James was older. Now, I tried last night to do some initial research about Daniel James, but I encountered a similar problem to what a lot of us have doing this research, is that these names are so common that you get hundreds, if not thousands of hits, and it's very time consuming to go through them all. So unfortunately, I was not able to find anything, and that doesn't mean I'm giving up. So I used the census, and here's the census from 1790, and it lists by town free white males and females and slaves. I believe that number there is 190. Ben was one of those slaves. Okay. At this point, there were about 12,000 slaves in New Jersey, which was 8% of the total state population. We'll continue with the census. So in 1800, there were some changes made to the census. They had different columns for different things. And I was able to determine that there were 1,564 slaves in Middlesex County, and Ben would have been one of these. The 1810 census is gone. It burned in a fire that was set by the British in Washington, D.C. During the War of 1812. However, a contact with my local historical society found a tax document, a New Jersey tax document, that shows that Ben was in East Windsor in 1810, and he was on the tax rolls. I have yet to determine what this means. Due to the pandemic, last March, every place that I wanted to go, all of the books I wanted to see, the libraries, the research, everything stopped. So I'm able to present what I had up until that point and what I've been able to do online. Hopefully, I'll be able to get back to it towards the end of this year. The 1820 census, excuse me, now started to include free colored persons. And it lists only 25 slaves in East Windsor. And at this point, I know that Ben was not one of them. There were 85 free colored persons in East Windsor. And Ben was apparently listed there. Now, experts in this sort of thing have done some analysis of the census documents and the counts of people and realized that the numbers didn't match. And what they believe is happening is that the slaves were not actually gaining their freedom. Rather, they were being kidnapped, sold, transported to the South. Slaves could no longer be brought into the country, so the Southern plantations were desperate for additional slaves. And they found that they could purchase them at a very good price from New Jersey. And New Jersey slave owners could reap a very tidy profit. So there were gangs that would go out and kidnap, particularly Black children, any slave, even if they were already free. And unfortunately, the ringleader of this particular group was a Middlesex County freeholder. And he was famous within these illegal circles that people would actually say that it was best to get the slaves from him, and he would actually have them branded so you could tell that they were from him because he was a freeholder and he had judges, etc., in his pocket, that it was very easy to get away with this. The 1830 census has never been put online, but I have managed from other sources to get some background information. The first statement is that since in 1804, gradual abolition was supposed to have started, the thought is that by 1830, there shouldn't be any young slaves because they would all have been freed. However, that turns out not to be the case because the census shows that there are many slaves under the age of 26. And because New Jersey was between the slave states of the South and the supposed free states of the North, New Jersey ended up behaving as both a free and a slave state. Yes, the Underground Railroad was very active through New Jersey, and there were many folks who would help escaping slaves. However, New Jersey also routinely allowed Southerners and bounty hunters to recapture their escaped slaves and made all of our processes of courts and jails, etc., available to them. So it was a very schizophrenic situation where both things were happening at the same time. Through all of this, I'm also still keeping an eye on what's happening with Sam Ely. And I found him in the census of 1830. And wow, was I surprised when I saw that he now has 2 more slaves. I thought he only had Ben, and he had manumitted Ben back in 1807. And I have no answer for this. I have not been able to find any additional information. I will have to go somewhere where I can access the census of 1830, either in microfiche or in some other way, because it's not available online, to see if I can find some more information. So I went ahead to 1840. And in 1840, I found Sam, and now he has no slaves at all. He died at the end of that year, so he was counted in the census, but then he passed away. And he was buried at the First Baptist Church here in Hightstown. Now, I've been looking all over for his grave and his tombstone. And I believe, I have yet to verify this, but I believe that when the church needed a parking lot, that this part of the burial ground was paved over. So that may be why I haven't been able to find it. And what about Ben? Ben shows up in the 1840 census as a head of household, and he now has 2 other free colored people with him. And the age brackets line up with the 2 slaves that Sam had in 1830. I have no idea if these are the 2 same people. Perhaps Ben was married and these are his children, but at this point, Ben is approximately 60 years old. Maybe these are grandchildren. I have not been able to get any additional information. And quite frankly, this is where the trail ran cold for me. I haven't gotten any farther than 1840. So at the beginning, you were referred to a book called The Ragged Road to Abolition. I just finished reading it, and there were 2 things that struck me the most. And the first was a quote near the beginning of the book, that if you stand on the Mason-Dixon line and you look north, New Jersey appears far more dedicated to slavery than if we look south. And one of the ways that you know that to be true is that there were slaves in New Jersey right up until the 13th Amendment abolished slavery in 1865. Now, there weren't many by 1865, probably less than a dozen, but slavery was still in New Jersey well after many, many, many other states, particularly northern states, had abolished the practice. So this all started because I bought this house. A science teacher buys a historic home. So let's look at the 1800 part of the house. If you go up in the attic, you find hand-hewn beams that still have the bark of the tree on them. You find this construction, it's called peg and post, where there are no nails. The beams, the wooden beams, are put together with these long wooden pegs holding them together. And you'll notice that there's a triangular space at the peak, and it was filled with bricks. So to give you an idea of what it's like to own a historic home, we had an electrician doing some work for us, and he was up in the attic, and I was looking at this particular wall. You can see the brick with the plaster over it, and the plaster has been falling off. And I looked up to the peak, and I noticed that there appeared to be a gap where the wall itself seemed to be leaning in towards the room. I pointed this out to the electrician, and he immediately grabbed me and pulled me back. And he said, that wall is about to collapse. I'm going to have to brace it. So he went and got some wood and nailed some things together, and he said, okay, I want you to stand over here, and I want you to have your phone, and I want you to hit 9-1. And then I want you to wait, because that's when I'm going to put the brace up. But if this wall falls, it could fall on me, and it could fall through the floor into the room below, and I want you to be ready to get help. So I stood there with my finger poised, and the wall did not fall, and he was able to one by one bring all of the bricks down. Fortunately, it was only the peak. We thought it was the entire wall, but it was just the top part that was in danger of collapse. So here's a close-up of some of those bricks. Each one is a little bit different. You can tell that they've been made by hand. And I wondered, did Ben make them? Did he touch them? Did he stack them? Did he put the mortar in? We also have a lot of square nails. Was Ben involved with pounding those nails or making those nails? Or was his role purely to be out in the fields with the crops? I don't know. I did a lot of research trying to find where Ben may be buried. Also, all the members of the Ely family and the others who owned and lived in my home. And there is a corner in the Cedar Hill Cemetery in Hightstown where there are many unmarked graves. And there is some local historical evidence that there may have been a section for Blacks and that burials may have gone back as far as 1811. I have no idea if Ben is there or not. I have not been able to find any evidence of when he passed away or where he may have been buried. So I'd like to make one last point before my last slide, and that is that slaves were brought to New Jersey for the purpose of agriculture, for working the fields, growing crops. And by virtue of New Jersey's wonderful soil, the state was able to not only become an economic powerhouse, but to feed the economic and populated powerhouses of New York City and Philadelphia. And back in the mid to late 1800s, someone coined the term the Garden State. And it appears now on every license plate. And I would just like you to think that when you glance at a license plate and you see that it says the Garden State, please remember who the gardeners were, because New Jersey became the state that it is today on the backs of all of those slaves working in the fields and as domestic servants. And so finally, you've been looking at me from the front. If you were to stand behind me, you would get a slightly different view of my office. And as I started doing this research, I remember one day I was sitting here researching on the computer, and all of a sudden it occurred to me that I'm sitting in the 1800 part of the house. And I wondered if Ben had built it, if Ben had been in this room. So when did he die and where is he buried? And more importantly to me, who are his descendants? And this is as far as I've been able to go with this research. I'm hoping that there's more out there, and I'm hoping that maybe someone paying attention has a hint for me. So I thank you very much for your attendance. This is the end of my presentation, and I am happy to take questions. So how do I go back to where we were before? There we are. There's me.
All right. Thank you so much, Pat.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So yes, please, if anybody does have any questions, please, you can submit them using the questions box in your dashboard. You can send them over and we'll be happy to answer them. As a comment from one of the library staff members about the censuses, the census of 1830 is not available for New Jersey. Apparently only Cumberland County survives.
Okay.
There is we do have a research guide on our website that deals with reading tax ratables and tax lists and that. So please take a look at what we have available. You can always reach out to the library if you're looking for help with that.
Is that available online, or do I have to actually go into the library?
Nope, it's available.
I couldn't figure out how to get into it online.
Okay. All right. Sure.
Thank you, but thank you for the hint.
Yeah. So, all right. Who was Richard Ely's mother-in-law who died of dysentery?
It would have been a Mount. Her last name would have been Mount, because Richard Ely's, you know, his wife was Jemima, and so it would have been Jemima's mother. His wife, Richard's wife, was Lydia, but Anne's, not Sam, Richard, right? Richard and Jemima Ely, Sam's parents. I'm looking it up. Hold on. Richard's father was Thomas. Richard married. All right, Lydia Day, or Dye, D-E-Y. Richard Mountmare and Lydia Dye was his wife. So whoever Lydia's parents were, that would have been the mother-in-law. The last name would have been D-E-Y. So, and this is the book I'm looking it up in.
Okay. Do you know where the Mason-Dixon line ended in the east?
Parts of New Jersey are actually south of the Mason-Dixon line. At least that's what I read last night. I did not pull up a map to double check that. But that was one of the points that was being made by the author of, I don't see where I put the book.
Pat, I think the author is James Gigantes.
Yes, the Ragged Road to Abolition. And the point that was being made with that quote was that if you were on that line, you could still see north versus south, and that in New Jersey. But no, I could not tell you exactly where that line was in the state. Good question. I'm going to have to go look that up now.
Have you had any indication that the house is haunted?
No, it's a happy house. We felt that as soon as my husband and I came to tour it. We'd been looking for a house in the area for about 2 years. Our realtor, we actually looked at a house next door that we did not care for. And then this one, the price dropped. And so we had a limit as to what we were willing to spend. And then all of a sudden, the next time I did a search, this house came up because they had dropped the price under our limit. And we came to see it. And I remember just sitting here, and we left. And we were at a stoplight a couple of miles away. And I got out of the car, and we were following our realtor, and I knocked on her window. And she says, yes. And I said, can we see it again? And I just stood there in the middle of the street with the light. And she said, what, now? I said, yes. And she just looked at us, and we turned around, and we came right back, and we went through the house again. I said, that's it. We love this house. It's home. It's peaceful. There's nothing scary about it, other than the bills when something goes wrong.
A couple comments. Great visuals. Thank you for the great information. Love it. Thank you for a lovely webinar. I love how you covered the gaps in the knowledge. So
thank you.
Some great comments. Can you please remind us how many enslaved persons were in New Jersey at the height of slavery?
I believe it was the figure that I see most often is just under 13,000, but there are some places where I've read numbers as high as 20 or 24,000.
All right.
Counts were very difficult to come by, especially during the period of 1810 to 1830, when there were a lot of illegal goings-ons with the kidnappings and slaves being sent off to the South. There are some harrowing stories of New Jersey slaves being put on ships in New York and in the Delaware River, surreptitiously being hidden and sailing away to the South.
Have you tried Ancestry.com forums or family trees to find his descendants?
I've been working with Family Search because it's free. I have not wanted to pay for Ancestry. Now, my husband has a subscription, and he uses it because he is able to trace his lineage here in this country. I am not. I'm a first-generation American. My parents came here in the late 1950s. And Ancestry he's paying almost $300. So every once in a while, when I really want to know something, I have him help me and look things up. But he's working full time, and I'm not as familiar with that program. That is something that I just started doing recently, and quite frankly, with not much more success than I've had with Family Search.
Thank you so much for this wonderful presentation. Do you have any plans to share your presentation with schools in our area?
Once I'm given the link for where the recording is, I know that the school where I used to teach, the history teachers are interested in perhaps using it in their classrooms when they teach this period of history. I'm also giving the presentation to the senior center here, but at this point, I have not reached out to the schools. I still have a lot of friends who are teachers, and to be perfectly honest, they are completely and totally overwhelmed with how they have to teach the situations now with the pandemic. And I wouldn't want to put one more thing on them in an expectation that they might use this. But I would be happy to give it to any school or any teacher who wanted me to do a repeat performance or to use the recorded version that you
have. Somebody says, some of the architecture reminds me of Shaker furniture, especially the pegs.
Pegs. I'm not sure what they're referring to.
In your attic.
The peg, like the peg and post construction in the attic? Because the furniture that we own is eclectic. It's a mix of everything. I don't even think I own anything as old as this house. Certainly not. I probably couldn't afford it. There are pieces of furniture that are made with the same notion of not having any nails in them. And that continued for a long time. You can even find Victorian furniture that is like
that. Terrific presentation. Do you think that perhaps in the future your gorgeous historical home might become a museum?
I think it has two things going against it. Number one is that someone would have to be willing to take it over and manage it as a historic home, which was the entire reason that it got moved and plopped over here in the first place. The second is that there's a lot about it that is no longer true to the periods in which it was built. For example, I learned that there used to be a second staircase so that the two parts of the home, there's 1800 and 1860, and each one had a staircase. When the house was moved here, one of the staircases was taken out in order to be able to connect on the second floor. Because the house was built at two different times, all of the interior walls are solid brick. It makes for some very interesting complications whenever you're doing electrical or plumbing work. And it has all new windows, all new bathrooms. It's completely modernized for a 21st century home. There are a lot of the original architectural features, but I don't know that you would actually at this point classify it and put it on the registry of historic places, for example. The house has been on tour. It was on the Historical Society house tour several years ago. The gardens were on the Garden Club tour 2 years ago. And last year, the house was on the Holiday House tour. for the women's club. So I hit the trifecta. The house has been on all 3 tours. And so I said to all of the organizers, I said, good, I've done all 3 tours, I'm done. And they looked at me and they said, oh no, we're just gonna get right back around to you again. So I can let you know the next time the house is on tour, and I'm happy to take people through it.
The book of birth dates and family information, where did you find that?
You mean this book? This was done in 1980 locally by a local historian for the express purpose of having enough research for the town to decide if they wanted to preserve the home or not, and their decision was not. I was also given, I have it in a different binder, some of the photographs, etc. We were told when we purchased the home that these things, there's a portrait, a map, a few other items, that they were being given to us along with the home, but that we either had to promise to take care of them or return them to the Historical Society. And when we sell the home, we have to exact the same promise from the new owners. So that this information, the ideal is for the information to stay with the house. But if you can't trust somebody to take care of it, then it will go to the local Historical Society.
Thank you for a wonderful, informative talk. See you in May at GCM. So happy I tuned in. Good luck with finding Ben. Great work.
Thank you.
Congratulations, Patricia, on the progress you have made. This is from Janice, who remembered chatting with you when you started your research journey.
Yes. Hi, Janet.
And she's wishing you continued success and hope you discover the descendants of Ben. You are definitely called to do this, and Ben is guiding you. So.
Oh, I sure hope so, because boy, I'm a science teacher. this has been tough for me. I'm getting better. It's a challenge, and I like a challenge. Thank you, Janice. That was very nice of you.
Somebody asked, can you share the slide deck, or at least the ones with the historical information about New Jersey slavery? The slides were very good, as well as the whole presentation.
Thank you. Yeah, as a teacher, I'm much more used to having interactive lessons. And even when I've done presentations, Master Gardener presentations, you have an audience, you interact with the audience. And as a science teacher, there's a lot that is hands-on. So for me, this was a real challenge because it's so static. So I'm glad that you think I pulled it off, because it's not the type of presentation that I'm used to. So thank you. And nothing like a good camera.
Yeah. Somebody said that the square nails in the attic look like they used a horseshoe nail.
Yeah, yes, they do look like horseshoe nails. I have no idea if they are, but those nails are found all over the house. The first floor in particular has the large plank floors. Another little interesting tidbit there, when we had to insure the house and when it was appraised, that was another difficult process. It's very difficult to appraise a historic home. But one of the questions came up that if anything ever happened, if we wanted replacement value for our insurance, that the floors actually made the house exorbitantly expensive to rebuild, because it's very difficult to find anyone who actually still makes those wide plank floors. They have to be made by hand. And we also have a problem if we want the floors refinished, which at some point they're going to need to be, because of those nails, the refinishing cannot be done as you typically see with the machines that are used to grind off the top layers. It would actually all have to be done by hand. I don't want to know what that would cost. Not yet.
A couple people have suggested try your local public library. Some of them might be offering Ancestry Library Edition for free remotely during the pandemic. So.
Uh-huh. I think I remember talking to my local reference librarian about that. I have to go back and check that. That was recent. That was recent that my library in particular started allowing people inside. So I will go back around and check with that. Thank you. That's a good suggestion.
This is Regina. Could I briefly interject with some information about Ancestry Library Edition?
Yes.
They have just extended remote access, ProQuest has, through June 30th because of the pandemic. Normally, Ancestry Library is only available in building because the remote licensing is so expensive. But over the course of the pandemic, ProQuest as the vendor has made remote access possible for public libraries. So you can go to your local public library's website, and you can use your local public library card to log in and access Ancestry Library Edition. And it should have the same digital collections that you find on Ancestry.com. Just for everybody's information, the state library has a little tutorial on using Ancestry Library Edition that's up on both our YouTube channel and up on the Genealogy Research Guide as well. And if anybody has any questions about that, you can always email me, and I will put my email in chat.
Okay. But one thing I have learned through all of this is how time consuming all of this is. I mean, I gave a presentation in about 45 minutes, but it has taken literally almost a year and a half to get this far. Obviously, I could have gotten much farther if I, without the pandemic, but even still, any little thing will literally take hours. Because I don't just take one source unless I know it's a reputable source. If I find something in the census, I'm going to take that at face value. But everything else I try and double and triple check, and it's very time consuming. But I will do that. Thank you, Regina.
Somebody said we did not remove the second staircase. The Estenez had removed it.
Oh, the Estonese removed it. So that must is that Francis?
Yes.
Oh, hi, Francis. Hi. Yes, we bought the house from Francis. I recall reading something about trying to break through upstairs to connect to one of the upstairs bathrooms, that there had been a staircase there. Okay, so the Estonese did that, not you. But I believe that Francis still had to break through the wall.
All right. Somebody says that your presentation is public broadcasting system. You should publish it on PBS. Love it, knowledgeable, and very interesting.
Really? Gee whiz. Not bad for a science teacher. That's some compliment. Woohoo. Thank you. I have no idea how to go about publishing something like that. So. Whatever. That's nice, and that would be wonderful. And if I got paid for it, it would be even better. But quite frankly, I think that the information itself is really what's valuable, that people need to understand what really happened in New Jersey, because what has been taught in schools, certainly when I was in school, and in New Jersey history, does a disservice to us as a society. And I've noticed here in town that there's really kind of like a whitewash, that it's very nice to think about the patient's track stories and the manumission stories. But I believe that there are, and I have found there are some real horror stories. And I can't lay claim to one side or the other because my family had nothing to do with this. We were in another country. But I think it's important for everybody to know what really happened, and to look at it, accept it, deal with it, and apologize and try and do better. And this is my little way of trying to do better. For all I know, I have ancestors involved in slavery just in other parts of the world. I have no idea. I can't find out a thing.
All right, well, looks like we have one more comment. So thank you for the informative talk. And I visited the house on a December house tour in 2019. So.
Oh, that was the holiday tour, the Christmas one. We don't call it a Christmas one. It was a holiday one. Yeah, that was a lot of work too. I decorated my brains out. As a matter of fact, when we got to this next Christmas in 2020, I just did the minimal. I said, oh no, that's it. I decorated so much in 2019, and now nobody can come in. It's just my husband and myself, so I kept it simple. But I'm sure they're going to be asking me to be back on the tour again.
So thank you so much. This was great.
Thank you.
We loved having you, Pat, and I like to thank everybody for joining us today. You continue to make our programming a success, and we really appreciate all of your support during this time. As I said before, this is being recorded, so everybody will get a link once it is available. So I'd just like to give a final thanks to Pat for a fantastic presentation, and
Thank you for having
letting us into her home. To everybody else, be safe, be well, and hopefully we can see you soon.
and get a vaccination. I got one. Number 2 is coming up.